My name is Cam Anderson. I'm the owner and sole employee of Blacktail Studio. Small one-man woodworking shop that's kind of turned into a woodworking shop and social media channel, YouTube channel. I'm always trying to learn. I'm trying to get better at woodworking, and when I learn something, I try to share it with others. Well, the reason I started using Wagner is because I found the wood supplier that I go to uses Wagner, and I tend to defer to the experts. If I didn't know anything about moisture meters, I asked Aaron at Bagopi, what do you use? As I understand it, Wagner is kind of the industry standard, and they use some handheld ones, but they also have some big ones in their kilns that they use. And the reason why it makes a lot of sense for me and why I have to use a Wagner is because it'll tell the moisture down inside the wood, whereas I still have one that I use for firewood. It's got the little sharp pins on it, and that'll tell you the wood or the moisture content on the surface. And what I found a lot of times is you cut into it and it's way different inside. So the Wagner being able to tell that moisture down inside the wood is just critical for me, and also being able to trust it, because there's other ones out there that claim that, but they don't have the reputation that Wagner does, so you don't know if the reading they're giving you is actually correct or not. To do that, I had to go a little bit back to my college, science days of like, how am I going to do a scientific study on this? And I needed to take samples from, I ended up being several hundred boards over 7 or so different stores across the state. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a nightmare for me to longhand add all this in there. And I'd already owned the Wagner at that point, and I realized, luckily before I started this, that the Wagner has some built-in smart feature that you can just take a reading, and it basically puts it all into a file for you. And I'm probably dumbing this down a little bit more than it is, but it'll export it all in one thing, so I can have all of the Tigard, Oregon stores, Lowe's in one file and not have to longhand everything out. So that was really cool. So if you have big jobs or big stacks of lumber, if you want to get readings from an entire tree and have them all localized in one file, that was really cool to have. I only woodwork in Oregon, so I generally know what the equilibrium moisture is now, but it's a pretty cool feature to be able to tell what the wood needs to be dried to, in your living room versus your shop versus wherever. So for me, it stays pretty consistent, but I think it's a pretty cool feature that Wagner added, is that equilibrium moisture content reading to tell the moisture in, say, your shop versus your living room. And as I understand it, you want some air behind the wood. So this one is leaning against, so it should be just fine. And you can see there, 9.3%. And like I mentioned, move it all around. And this is basically textbook perfect for Oregon. And this was, again, came from California. And what I've been told is a little bit drier is better than a little bit too wet. So sometimes they'll dry it a little bit further, and that's generally okay because it'll kind of equalize in your shop. It'll kind of soak up that little bit of moisture, but it's really consistent. 9, 10, like I mentioned, 9 to 11 is pretty much standard for Oregon. And right now we've been at like basically 9 to 10 and a half. So good job, GL Veneer Company down in California, because it's really consistent. There's no pockets of trapped moisture, which isn't a pretty thick slab, so that could happen. And that's how you use it. That's how you check and make sure that the wood is ready to work with.